My name is Sally Engelberg at birth, Frishberg now. I was born in 1934, which was a bad time to be born because in 1939 World War II started. And I came to the United States after the World War II and after the Holocaust, which is the genocide that was perpetrated on the Jewish people in particular, but others suffered terribly too. So I came here on November 10th, 1947. Okay, I was born before the war, but the war was upon us because the rumble, the buzz, the fear, the noise about what's going to happen was overwhelming. It even got to a little kid like me. I felt it. I knew that there was a great deal of unrest, and I kept my ears open for it, and I listened. I was interested in what was happening, even though I was very little and probably misunderstood a great deal. When the Nazis came into Poland, well, it's the Germans. The Nazis, not all the Germans were Nazis, you understand that. But when the Germans came into Poland, their behavior to a little child like me who expected the worst because of all I had heard was amazingly impressive. They had beautiful manners. They didn't miss an opportunity to say sorry, thank you, may I, to run and help. They were, and I just couldn't figure out why everybody was afraid of people who behaved so well. I couldn't understand it. I liked them better than I liked all the other people. Well, 3 of them were settled in our house because the town I come from was very small, and there was nowhere to house anyone that didn't live there. There was no public space of any kind. So 3 were settled in our house, and they were officers, because as the soldiers who came to arrange for this said to my mother, we soldiers can sleep any place. It doesn't matter. We sleep standing up, but we want a peaceful space for our officers so they can be productive in their plan making. And by the way, they were able to say that to my mother because my mother spoke Yiddish. The language comes as a result of the Jews who were defeated by the ancient Romans, we're talking 2,000 years ago, were trying to escape from the Middle East. They were trying to get out of there because it wasn't fun. You know, a war zone is not fun. And many made it to Poland. And in fact, when Catholicism reached Poland, so did the Jews. And it was almost like, you know, double blessing, because the Jews brought with them skills that Poland didn't have, such as banking. You know, the Jews had been around the world and saw how it works. And the Polish government actually invited the Jews. They were invited. So these Jews come there and settle down, and many, many years later I arrive on the scene. But I have the advantage of a language that they created in order to make a living. It's like, we hear it now too. You hear people talking gibberish, it sounds like, but what they're doing is trying to fit English onto their understanding of their language. And this is what Yiddish is. It is medieval German. And the real German speaker and the medieval German speaker understand each other. And my mother and the soldiers got along fine. And they explained how they will be no burden and how they will get up early in the morning and go to headquarters. That's the big house in town. Every morning early they took off. We didn't see them except one. One out of the three used to come home much earlier. And when he came, he waited impatiently for my father to play chess. These two men learned to care for each other very much because of their chess games. They talked about their families, they talked about the war. And Mr. Arnold came from Munich, that big city where Hitler rose to power, and he understood what's going on. And he tried to inform my ignorant, very remote, uneducated. Formerly, my father's education was nil, but in a practical sense, he was very, very bright. He tried to inform my father, and he tried to explain to my father, and this gave my father a clue of the fact that we can't just sit there and think it'll pass, we'll get over it, you know. I quote Dr. King all the time, we shall overcome, and that was the Jewish attitude. We'll overcome, we always do. There are wars all the time in Europe, they were killing each other all the time. And we manage, we stay out of the hot areas. But Mr. Arnold insisted, no, this is not that kind of war. This is a different kind of war. Just as trying to understand now the difference of wars to come that will be differently fought. And he tried very hard to explain, and I think he did it because we didn't follow after that. We tried our best not to. So our best consisted of appearing to do everything that we were instructed to do, placards on the church walls, asked the citizenship what to do, or told them, didn't ask them, told them what to do. And we appeared to follow everything that we were told, but in our, not only in our hearts, but in any practical way that we could, we did differently. For example, when the order came out, and that order upset my father and mother very much because the order said, usually it said all citizens, it had the date, name of the town, and then it said citizens of the town, Bujajovica, must turn in all their valuables. Well, the fact that they picked on us and separated us from the other citizens made my parents very unhappy, especially my father. Oh, he almost blew the roof off the house because he felt, without knowing the word, that this was segregation. And why would they segregate it? No good purpose. And so his efforts to find some security grew more intense, and we hid. My mother sewed all her jewelry into her skirt hems. That's what women wanted, that long skirts. And she had all these hems to sew jewelry into. And my father sewed dollars into his shoulder pads of his jackets because he had dollars, because he had two brothers in the United States. And one of those brothers, the oldest one, had been in World War I. And whereas he felt very secure and comfortable in his little quaint town, he learned in the army that as a Jew, he was very much hated by the other Polish people. Polish soldiers, young people got together and made his life utterly miserable. And as a result of that misery, he committed to the task of getting out of there. He came home and he said, in no way will I stay in this land that is blood-soaked. And he got out, and he came to the United States, and those trips were no fun. We know how difficult it was, and I don't know if it was expensive. Where did they get the money? I never found out details because my uncle didn't talk about it. But I knew the roots of the problem. I knew. Where is Sam? Oh, Sam ran away from Poland, came to the United States, and the immigration was huge then. And many of the immigrants, you can't ever say most were Jews, because Jews are a very small minority, so it's very hard for us to be most in any case. But the Jews that could got out because they learned that experience of being thrown into the majority was painful. And so they learned and got out and came here and worked like slaves. It wasn't easy. And they sent money home. Sam brought the next brother, Nat, and the two of them sent money home to their family. My father was the next oldest, so he became like the leader of his widower father and his youngest brother. And he took care, and what he did was save every dollar he could, that's why he had quite a pack, and spend Polish money. Poland was a defeated country. Nobody wanted that money, it was garbage. But the dollar had mighty strength. And my father's shoulder pads were now filled with dollars. And they did this for hoping to use it to find some freedom somewhere. And they did, they used it. We never found freedom, but we found some food. And during a war, food is so outrageously priced that you don't get much for your hard-earned or hard-pressed dollars. So this is how we are planning things to be. We'll use our dollars to find a way. And soon after this announcement, another comes out which identifies us as Jews, because Jews are a white race. I don't know how we got white. Long, long ago, I suspect we were not, because we come from very, very sunny land. Now all white, and we do have a frizzle in our hair, as I do still, and that's my proof of Jewishness. So we are waiting for things to happen, but we're hoping that nothing else can happen, because what are they going to do? We have nothing to give them anymore. They think we hid. I'm sure everybody hid. So we're waiting, and what comes out next is Jews must wear a Star of David, a white armband with a blue band, and a blue star in the middle. And it looks like the Israeli flag. I wonder if that's why they picked that. I don't know. Anyway, we are astonished, because what are they doing? Playing with the decorations during the war? It didn't seem smart, but it was, because it identified each and every one of us now that they would have overlooked. Now you couldn't. So after this came out for the purpose of identification, other things came out that, if it didn't taunt us, it didn't make an impression on me, and I may not remember. But things happened that I really don't remember. This caused a lot of trouble, because we were getting food, how many people in your family and so on, and Jews got half. and we were getting assignments of work, the most difficult work the Jews got. Sometimes German trucks went through the streets and picked up strong-looking people to take to Germany for forced labor. The Jews got picked up first. So this was not helpful, and we couldn't get rid of it because if a Jew was not given up by a Catholic, Poland is all Catholic, so I talk that way, if a Jew wasn't given up, that Polish Catholic was punished. And the punishment was always death. They didn't play around. And the giving up was rewarded. August 1942 in my community. You know, as they came into a community, they got organized and did their thing. And in my community, it happened in August 1942. And what it said there was, on this date, at this time, all Jews must gather at the railroad station to be resettled in the East for the purpose of enjoying better jobs, better homes, better health care, better schools. Everything was going to be better in the East. My grandfather, my father's father, did not go with us. He went to the trains because my grandfather believed that the Germans, whose history was so proud and so indicative of greatness, such talent, such effort, such wonderful results in all their work. My grandfather said that this is the best of humanity, and you shouldn't be afraid of the best. You should hope for their success so that they achieve better things. And he wouldn't bend. He just refused to accept that there was a terrible change. He became a member of a huge crowd of Jews who had been gathered from other small towns, and they were all brought to the train stations and taken to another community where they were all together, and they were given shovels, and they were told to dig trenches, and after they dug them, they were shot into them. And after their bodies were covered, the neighbors told us that the earth often moved for days because not everyone had died. And I, for a considerable spell, dreamt that I was buried alive. For a considerable length of time, that was my nightmare. Well, my father remembered Mr. Arnold's warnings, which said, do not accept lies. And they are lying. They're all lying. Don't go by the lies they give you. Figure it out as best you can for yourself. And my father said, there's nothing in the east of Poland. He's figuring. Then why am I listening to them? Why am I going to cooperate with them? No, we won't go. And he sent word out to his Jewish community, don't go to the railroad station. Do whatever you can, but don't do that. Now, this is all by mouth because we had no phones. We had no means of communication. So my father sent this information out to one and all, and they all came running. So where are we going to go? And my father said, I don't know. You don't know where we're going to go, and you're telling us not to go to the station? My father said, yes. Where are you going? My father said, I don't know that either yet. I will follow my feet to any hole that I can find, and I will hide in that hole. And that's what we did. We left the night before resettlement day, and we followed my father's feet, and we went where we could, which was the fields. And it was in August, so everything had already been cut down. The harvest was finished, and the heaps of whatever they cut on the fields, ready for the next step, were on the field, and we would approach this heap, and we would dig a hole on bottom and get inside and sit there all the next day. Farmers arrive very, very early, stay very late, have a very good time doing their farming. They sing, they laugh, they tell jokes. They're really fun to listen to, but you can't get out and show your face because many of them will give you up. The European countries are extremely anti-Semitic. Still, it hasn't changed. Though the Jews disappeared. Hitler made the Jews disappear. But the people have learned to hate, and you can't break the habit. You just do it. So this is where we hid for quite a period of time. I don't know how long. But I do know that what chased us off the fields was the change in weather. And that is the reason that we had to consider giving up. The other person we lost equally early was my youngest uncle, who was with us. My father had two brothers here, and next I'll tell you about Naphtali, and my father was one of the four brothers. And my uncle Naphtali, when we were preparing to leave at night and to go into the fields, my uncle Naphtali said to my father, "I'm going with you so that I can help you carry your children." Some of them couldn't walk yet. And my father said, "No, I will not allow you to do that. I insist that you run away. And you can do it because you're young, you're strong, you're fast, you're smart. You know the lay of the land, which is always important. You can outwit the Nazis." And my uncle was persuaded, I think, by what my father said next, which was, "You must survive in order to tell the future what evil people do to people who can't defend themselves." And I think that had an appeal for my uncle. I come from a family where we like to do what's good for people. So my uncle Naphtali let himself be persuaded, and he did what we did. He tried to hide in one of those heaps of grain, but he left something on the outside. I don't know what it was, because every person you spoke to told you something else. And once they uncovered him, they unceremoniously murdered him. And that was the end of my uncle Naphtali. He did ask for a minute of time with his God, and they honored it. They gave it to him. I hope he prayed for their destruction. And it came true eventually, but it did terrible harm to the world, terrible harm. We were my mother, father, and their 4 daughters. I was the oldest. I was 8. The others were all smaller. And next to us always were my mother's brother, his wife, and their 3 children, the ages of the younger children in my family. So I was the bossy child. And we stuck together, not because we thought we could help each other, but because we wanted the warmth of someone we loved, and that's why we stuck together. And I know that the adults considered giving up, going and facing death and being killed. That's what they did if they got you. But something intervened. A fortunate thing that intervened was a whistle. The blowing of a whistle and the infinite darkness, because there is no light in the field and on farms. It made us wonder, who's out here whistling at this hour in these conditions? Couldn't figure out, of course. And then the question became, well, what should we do? That is our whistle. What they meant, what my mother and uncle meant by our whistle is that this is the whistle they used at kids to communicate with each other. They had no cell phones, so they whistled. And whoever whistled attracted others, and before you know it, there was a bunch, maybe there were even two bunches somewhere, and they did what kids do, depending on age. They played, they had a good time, they danced, whatever. And that became their whistle, and they whistled and whistled and whistled, and we heard that whistle. And that whistle alerted my mother and my uncle that something is going on, and what should we do? Should we answer that whistle by whistling back, or should we fear that whistle? That might be an anti-Semite who is eager to destroy us, and he will go and get a reward for finding us, and we will be killed. Or is this the whistle of a friend who wants to tell us something? And they decided, we have no alternative but to try this last gamble. And so they whistled back, and into their arms came running a Polish Catholic farmer with whom they had been friends forever and ever. And when they hugged and kissed and whatnot, he said, you're in terrible danger. You're not going to last this way long. We have to find a better way. The we was so impressive, so endearing, so good for us. And my mother thought he was, at first he promised he'd come every night. He couldn't stay long because soon it'd be light. He would come every night to look for us. And he told us where to go, so looking would be easy. My father's geography was extraordinary. All you had to do was give him one house, and he knew all directions and all whatever. And my father said, yes, we'll meet you there. And the next night, he'd give us another address, and the next night another. And we kept listening to him because he knew where the search for the remaining Jews is going to be the next day, because his friends worked in the big house that was really a shack. They worked there, and they found things out, and they told each other and him, and he came and told us, don't go, blah, 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 go. And we followed his instructions, and we kept safe. But the weather we couldn't defeat, because so when things got really tough, and my mother said, you must build us something, a little hut, something. And he said, but I don't have a nail or a hammer or a piece of wood. They take everything from us that we have. The man was helpless, and we were helpless. So what are we going to do? And then one night he shows up, and he gives us directions to follow him. My father is at the end of the single line, and he is in the front, and he says, not a sound, not a sound. The babies, we had a baby, and my aunt had a baby. The babies must be held on their mother's chest so they can be stopped from crying. And you follow me. And we did. We didn't know where we were going, but we trusted him. We followed him, and we wound up in his house. His house was a humble farmhouse with the ladder in the middle, ready for us to climb to the attic, which he indicated, and we did as he told us. In the attic, we had straw all around the space. I don't know how large a space. We had this space that was straw or hay for sitting or lying down, our living space. In the middle, the open area in the middle had buckets for us to use as toilet. And this was our home for 2 years, not days or weeks or months, 2 years. And the system of operation was that we were locked in there, that the ladder was moved so that the kids couldn't gain access to us. And every night, Mr. Grocholski came after his family was sleeping, and he cleaned the buckets and brought them back. And at the end, he brought us a big pot of beans and potatoes, boiled beans and potatoes. We were supposed to have that food for next day, but we gobbled it up quickly. 1, 2, 3. But we were surviving. Then my little sister, I had, besides Lola, I had a smaller one. I believe at the time she was 2 years old. In due course, my little sister, the 2-year-old, Faggy, showed signs of death. And my parents decided to be very radically inspired to try and save her. So they wrapped her up in a blanket, put her in a basket, carried her to our native town, put her on the doorstep of the priest's residence, and left her there. And they counted on the priest knowing what's going on because he was a smart man and he was friendly with my father. And the priest took the baby to a young childless couple and gave the baby to them to take care of and help her grow up. And they undertook the job and they tried, but she died very soon after she was left. It was too late. And soon after her, my little cousin, who was somewhat older and therefore lasted a little bit longer, but he died. My sister is resting on the Catholic cemetery of Ujejovica, and my little cousin is resting next to the house where we were hidden. And soon after him, my aunt, his mother, who was a very robust lady, very strong and stately, she died, and she's resting next to her son. But he saved 15 of us, nevertheless. Now, how did this happen? No, he saved 12 of us. We were somewhere during the course of our being in his attic. He told my mother, it was a very difficult winter, and he told my mother that she has 4 brothers still alive in the forest. And my mother said, the forest? Oh my God, they'll never survive, they'll freeze. Stashek, you must bring them here. And he said, I can't, I'm afraid. They'll find me walking to the forest in this winter. They'll think there's something crazy about me and they'll shoot me. And my mother said, oh no, Stashek, no one will hurt you. You are being protected by God. You are doing God's work, trying to help people, and God will always protect you. Apparently they were of the same mind, Stashek and my mother, because he brought my 4 uncles. One night, we opened our eyes, and there they are, half frozen, true, but there they are. So he had the original 11, and he had the 4 brothers, 15, and we lost the 3 I mentioned. So one man saves 12 Jews. Imagine if there had been millions of helpers. but there weren't millions. However, there were thousands. And those thousands that are identified are now memorialized at a museum called Yad Vashem in Jerusalem. I go to see and to remember and to pay honor to Mr. Grocholski, whose story is in the museum there. So, we are still there, but we know from the lousy newspaper that the Germans are losing. My father smiles. My father sits in the attic under either, I can't remember this either. At any rate, my father sits there and mouths what it says. And we watch his lips. And if he smiles, we know it's good news. Now, how does he recognize the good news in a newspaper that is written in an occupied zone? You can't trust those papers, because my father's ability to figure out where what is tells him when they're moving forward and when they're retreating. And he knows, oh, they were here the other day and now they're back. There's a lot of retreating going on here. So these little smiles keep us going till the end. And when the end comes, Mr. Grocholski and his family return from hiding in an underground bunker, because the war is right over our heads, the shooting, the constant exchange. And it could have blown the house was a little modest house. It could have been blown away, but it wasn't. You see, God was protecting you. Well, He should have protected some more people. I'm so confused about people saying that to me. But Mr. Grocholski came home with his family. He put them all to bed, and he came up and he said, "You've been liberated. You're free to go." And we said, how are we going to do this? And he said, let's go. We couldn't walk because we didn't use our legs for 2 years, and they lose the wisdom to walk. They become atrophied. So he helped us, and some of us, I think 2 of my uncles were particularly, they seem to have lost less ability to function than the others. And we got down, and then he said to my father, even though you can't walk, I will tell you how to get to the invading Russian forces, where the easiest way so you can crawl over. And we did. He told us what to do, and we crawled, and we got there, and this is nighttime. They don't see us. They don't pay any attention to us because there might be dirt lying around. So we are waiting for daylight, and it comes, and when the daylight comes and the young soldiers see what they see, they can't believe it. Because we've been destroyed as human beings. We don't look like human beings, and I guess, who crawls? So they run and get their officer who's in charge, and he comes back. He's a doctor, and he says to my father, I will tell you how to survive. You need help, and we can't stay to help you, because we're going on to Berlin to kill Hitler. We have a date to kill him. They intended to do it, and they got to do it, the Russians. And I will tell you what to do to survive. And they gave us a little bit of food for all of us. And he said, this has to last you at least 3 days, because all you're allowed to do is take a small bite, and then a little while later, another small bite, and continue. And in a few days, when you feel that, hey, you can digest food, don't get too ambitious. little bits, a little at a time. Patience will help you. And we found, and they left, they said goodbye and they left. And we did exactly as he said, and we all made it. I don't know how we got to our home. I suspect very much that as the sun had risen, I had grown tired. And I suspect that the farmers who come with these big carts and horses took us on and delivered us to our village. I was in my village, and everybody else was in the village square, so to speak, and all they want to know is, where were you? And you're so white. My God, you're so white. What happened to you? We had no sun for 2 years, so we turned white. And where were you was the most important question. And we couldn't tell them because Mr. Grocholski made us swear that we would never tell a soul, because he was afraid of the anti-Semitism in his town and that someone would hurt him or him and his children. He was very eager to protect the safety of his children. And he said, you may never, never, never tell a person. No one. We are the people that shared an experience. That's it. Case closed. Nobody else. And my family kept a secret. My family would probably have not talked about it anyway, because I have learned for a long time now, that few talked. Most did not. I didn't realize how hard this was to talk about. But the people who did not talk made it impossible for me to remember accurately. So this is what I think happened. And we stayed in our house and we tried to readjust and to become human again, because we were way back, we were just primitive creatures at this point. And one night, young fellows from a nearby town arrived and knocked on our door, and my father answered the door, and they said, you're Jews. We don't want any Jews in Poland. Go back where you came from. Go to Palestine, you dirty Christ-killing Jews. If you are here when we come back, we'll kill you. Now we believe that people do that. Before we would not have believed, but now we believe. Before, I think the Jews believed if we're quiet and follow instructions and do what we're told and don't stir up any problems, we'll survive. In Poland and Romania and Hungary and all over Europe, they don't like Jews, they hate Jews. That's the European approach to getting along. And we left, and again, we didn't know where we're going, or how we're going, or with what. We had nothing. Now we really had nothing, not even the shoulder pads and then the hems. Well, what happened was that we set out walking, and we went into the fields, the friendly fields, and we walked from country to country. Sometimes, if something was moving, we got on it, but they kicked us off. So another time we did it again and got a few miles further. We went from country to country. I know that we were in Czechoslovakia, then it was one country, in Romania, in Hungary, in Austria. In Austria, we encountered the British Army because they got that share, and they were not friendly to the survivors. That was my experience. They were very stiff upper lip. That's the way the British are. And then we came to Munich, Mr. Arnold's city. And in Munich, it was the Americans who were the bosses. And I have to tell you, I don't know what your experience is, but mine is that there are no friendlier, no people more generous, more eager to show you their friendship than the Americans. They were extraordinary. And they brought in translators, and they talked to my parents about, well, you don't want to, we stayed in old army camps. That was what a refugee camp was. Formerly old army, now refugee. They said to my parents, you don't want to stay in refugee camps and be supported by others. You want to be people who stand on your own 2 feet and support yourself, and you want your children to learn to be citizens. That's what you want. And my parents were so worn out and so tired, and so they nodded their heads, yes. So they said, would you like to go back to Poland because you're a Polish citizen? Never, please, never, never. I never went back to Poland till after both my parents died, because I knew they'd kill me for it. They wouldn't have that. So we were encouraged to make a decision, and as they conversed, and they said, too bad you don't have someone in another country where you'd like to go. Israel was not born yet. Israel was born in 48. This is happening in 46. And there's nowhere to go. And we don't have anybody. But my father says, I have 2 brothers in the United States. You have brothers in the United States? Yes, they went before the war. They were smart. So they said, do you have information where they are? Well, he hadn't been in touch since the rise of Hitler 12 years before. So my father said, no, I don't know where they are. They said, don't worry, we'll find them. They did. It seems they used tax return records. So they found them, and before you know it, we had papers to go to the United States, and we knew we had priority because President Truman, who was really a decent sort of fellow, he was not what we have today. He was a good man. He said families where possible must be reunited first. Yeah. So we had priority status, and we wound up, well, it wasn't easy. It took us till November 10th, 1947 to get here, though they found us somewhere early in 46. The thing that delayed us the most was my sister Miriam's something on her lungs. They didn't know what it was, and they couldn't exclude it from being tuberculosis, which then, in view of the lack of medication, was not, you couldn't heal it, and it was very contagious, and America didn't want to import it. So we went back to the doctor once, twice, 3 times. They kept saying, if it doesn't change, it's old and we can disregard it. But if it changes, it's a living issue, and we have to keep her out of the States. So you go, they said, and we will take care of her here in a sanitarium. And when she's ready, we will send her to you. And we said, no, we're not separating. We stuck it out all this time. We're staying together. But all this saying was accompanied by crying, because if they said no, we cried, all of us. And they were just so decent and kind. And on the last appointment to come back again for another x-ray, my mother decided to approach not the American-speaking doctor with whom she couldn't talk, but his nurse, a receptionist, whatever she was. She was the girl who ran the office. My mother waited for her outside, and when she saw her coming from work, she approached her, and she said, "You know me, you know my family. My mother's Yiddish, and her German made them easy to understand each other." And my mother said to her, I clean the barracks for the soldiers," which was true, she did. "And the soldiers are so generous," my mother said. "I have lots of boxes of nylon stockings." Well, the Fräuleins, that's German for young lady, love nylon stockings. And I have cartons of cigarettes that the soldiers give me. And they all love. The cigarettes became currency in Germany. And my mother said, "If you would just sign that paper, I would give you everything I have. I have a big batch of things." She did. She saved everything up. She wasn't going to wear the stockings, and our family never smoked, so she saved everything very carefully, very nicely, as I still do. And the young lady listened to the offer, and she took her up on it. And the next thing you know, we were on the ship going to the United States. What an exciting thing that is. I am hoping that when young people hear my story, they understand that there is good and bad everywhere. But when the bad gets the upper hand, which is what happened to the Germans. There were good Germans, not many, I'll grant you. The vast majority went for Hitler in a big way because he lied so cleverly, and he knew their needs, and he fed those needs with promises that were utter lies. And that's how he got the vast majority, and that's how he fooled the world for 12 years.